Part 1. Child Soldiers. Picture this. You're 9 years old, your biggest worry is whether you'll win at marbles or get the last piece of candy. And then suddenly, adults show up, shove a real rifle into your hands, and bark, "From today, you fight!" Sounds like some twisted video game tutorial, right? Except this wasn't a game, it was history, and for millions of kids, it was reality. Children have always been the cheapest, easiest recruits in the book. They're small, they're obedient, and they're terrified of saying no. In conflicts across Africa, in Sierra Leone or Uganda, kids barely tall enough to carry an AK-47 were forced into militias. Imagine a child still wiping tears from their cheeks, hands shaking as they pull a trigger. And the commanders? They knew exactly how to lock them in. Many were forced to kill their own friends or even family members, an initiation designed to snap their childhood in half and make escape impossible. But this horror story didn't start in modern times. Let's rewind all the way to the Middle Ages, year 1212 Europe, the so-called Children's Crusade. The name sounds like a fairy tale, an army of innocent believers marching to reclaim the Holy Land. What actually happened? Tens of thousands of kids set off, convinced God had chosen them. What followed was a death march. Many starved along the way, others drowned at sea, and a tragic number were simply sold into slavery. And here's the cruel twist. Even those who survived didn't really survive. Child soldiers carried scars you couldn't see. After the guns were taken away, many couldn't read or write, but they could dismantle a rifle blindfolded. They didn't know lullabies or schoolyard rhymes, but they knew how to kill. Try dropping back into normal life after that. Spoiler, most never could. Adults love to say children are the future. It's a nice slogan, looks good on posters. But throughout history, adults have also been the ones to rob children of that future, turning their childhood into a battlefield. Part 2. The Children's Crusade, 1212. In 1212, Europe was restless. Crusades had already dragged generations of men into wars over the Holy Land, but this time, it wasn't armored knights or seasoned warriors who set out. It was children, thousands of them. They believed they were chosen by God to achieve what armies could not. History would remember it as the Children's Crusade, a name that sounds like a bedtime story but hides one of the most haunting tragedies of the Middle Ages. The movement began with a young boy in France claiming he had visions and divine orders to lead a crusade. Word spread like wildfire. Children left their villages, some without telling their parents, clutching crosses and singing hymns as they marched. They believed the seas would part for them, that miracles would light their way. To them, it wasn't madness, it was destiny. The reality was brutal. Tens of thousands of kids trudged across Europe with no supplies, no training, and no plan. Hunger hollowed their cheeks, blisters tore their feet, and exhaustion thinned their ranks. Bandits preyed on them along the roads, while disease spread like shadow through their ragged camps. For many, the holy journey ended in shallow graves by the roadside. Those who reached the coast faced even darker fates. Instead of parting seas, there were merchants and captains waiting, men who promised ships to carry them to Jerusalem. But instead of delivering them to the Holy Land, they sold many of the children into slavery in North Africa. Others died when ships sank in storms, swallowed by the same seas they thought would open miraculously before them. The Children's Crusade left no victories, no reclaimed lands, no triumphant homecoming. What it left was silence, villages missing their sons and daughters, parents waiting for children who never returned, and fields left empty where young hands once worked. Part 3. Child sacrifice in ancient civilizations. Across the ancient world, sacrifices were seen as the ultimate way to win the favor of the gods. Cattle, crops, even captured enemies were laid on the altar. But in some cultures, the offerings went further. They offered their own children. Few truths about history are as chilling as this. Entire societies once believed that the death of the young could keep their world alive. The Carthaginians are infamous for it. Archaeologists uncovered the Tophet, a burial ground filled with tiny urns containing the ashes and bones of infants. Ancient writers claimed parents handed over their babies to be burned alive in honor of Baal Hammon, the chief god. Scholars still argue about the scale. Was it ritual or mass tragedy? Either way, the evidence is heavy, and it stares back like a ghost from the soil. In the high Andes, the Inca carried out what they called capacocha. Selected children, beautiful, healthy, unblemished, were chosen as perfect offerings to the mountain gods. They were dressed in fine clothes, fed rich meals, and honored like royalty. Then they were led up freezing peaks, given maize beer or coca to dull their senses, and buried alive in icy tombs. Centuries later, archaeologists uncovered their mummified bodies, preserved by the cold, faces calm, as if frozen in sleep, their sacrifice eternal. The Aztecs, too, turned to children when they wanted to please Tlaloc, the rain god. The belief was cruelly specific. The god demanded the tears of children. The more they cried, the better the harvest would be. And so, priests made sure they cried. sometimes by pulling out fingernails or subjecting them to terror before leading them up the temple steps. Their tears watered the stones long before their blood did. Why would entire cultures do this? To them, it wasn't cruelty, it was necessity. But strip away the beliefs, and what's left is unbearable. The deliberate killing of children, not by strangers, but often by the hands of their own people. Today, we walk through museums and gaze at tiny skeletons, shrines, and artifacts, trying to understand. But maybe there is no understanding. For the children who never had a choice, who were dressed like little kings and queens, only to die on altars and mountaintops, there was no glory, only silence. History remembers the civilizations that thrived, but hidden beneath their temples and pyramids are the smallest graves, the ones that tell us just how dark human devotion can become. Part 4. Orphan experiments in medicine. Hospitals are supposed to heal, schools are supposed to protect, and orphanages are supposed to shelter. But history has a dark habit of twisting safe places into hunting grounds. In the 19th and 20th centuries, some of the most vulnerable children, orphans with no parents to defend them, were turned into experimental subjects. To the doctors and institutions, they weren't kids. They were test material. In Victorian England, poorhouses and orphanages overflowed with children no one wanted. Doctors saw an opportunity. Need to test a new vaccine? Try it on the orphans. Want to practice surgery? Use a child who had no guardian to object. Some experiments were disguised as treatments, but the children didn't get a choice. They simply endured. Across the Atlantic, the story was no better. In the United States, the early 20th century saw orphanages and state institutions partnering with medical researchers. Children were deliberately infected with diseases, measles, influenza, hepatitis, just to study how the sickness spread. Some were subjected to experimental radiation or given untested drugs. A child's pain was reduced to data in a notebook. The most chilling part is how normal it all seemed to the adults in charge. They wrote reports about subjects and results, never mentioning the screams or the terror in small eyes. The language of science scrubbed away the humanity. And because these children had no families powerful enough to speak for them, the experiment stayed hidden in plain sight. There were rare moments of survival, orphans who lived long enough to tell fragments of their stories. They spoke of being lined up, injected, cut open, or isolated in cold wards while doctors took notes. They weren't treated as patients, but as tools to be used up and thrown away. Looking back now, it's easy to feel shock. Part 5. Residential schools and stolen children. They called them schools, but they were really prisons with textbooks. From the late 19th century into the 20th, governments in Canada, the United States, and Australia ran residential schools designed to civilize Indigenous children. The official line was education. The reality was erasure. Children were taken from their families, stripped of their language, their culture, and in too many cases, their lives. The process began with removal. Agents arrived in villages taking children by force or coercion. Parents who resisted were threatened with jail. The children were shipped off to institutions hundreds of miles away, where their hair was cut short, their traditional clothes confiscated, and their names replaced with English ones. Within days, their identities were rewritten. Life inside was brutal. Speaking a native language was punished with beatings. Cultural practices were forbidden. Days were filled with endless chores and rote lessons, all aimed at breaking ties to home. Hunger was constant, abuse was rampant, and diseases like tuberculosis spread unchecked in the crowded dormitories. Mass graves uncovered near former schools in recent years have revealed the scale of the tragedy. Countless children never made it home. Survivors carry memories of cruelty disguised as discipline. Some remember being locked in dark closets for speaking a single word of their mother tongue. Others recall classmates disappearing overnight, their absence never explained. Even those who physically survived carried scars that shaped entire generations. Trauma passed down like a silent inheritance. Part 6. Witch-hunted children. When people think of witch trials, they picture adults, women in black robes, bonfires, and Salem hysteria. But children, too, were dragged into the nightmare. Sometimes they were used as accusers. Other times, they became the accused. And history shows that being labeled a witch as a child could be a death sentence. In 16th and 17th century Europe, waves of witch hunts swept through villages. Fear and superstition ran wild, and suspicion fell on the most vulnerable. Children who behaved strangely, muttered to themselves, or simply looked different could be singled out. Some were accused of making livestock sick, others of causing storms. In a world desperate to explain misfortune, a child's quirks could be twisted into proof of dark powers. Punishments were merciless. Trials involved torture, designed to wring confessions from terrified little bodies. Imagine a 10-year-old being pressed with questions, beaten, or locked away until they admitted to impossible crimes. Many never left the cells alive. Others were publicly executed, their deaths seen as justice against evil. But children weren't only victims, they were also weaponized. In Salem, Massachusetts, in 1692, it was the testimony of young girls that sparked the infamous trials. Their accusations carried the weight of truth, even when built on fear, hysteria, or manipulation by adults. While these children weren't tortured, their words condemned neighbors, relatives, and strangers to death. In both roles, accuser and accused, children were pawns in games of fear they couldn't control. The tragedy isn't locked in the past. In parts of modern Africa, children are still branded as witches. Poverty, illness, or death in a community can be blamed on a child, who is then beaten, abandoned, or even killed. Some are dragged to self-proclaimed pastors for exorcisms that amount to torture. The witch hunts never truly ended, they simply changed shape. What all these stories reveal is the same cruel pattern. When societies panic, children often bear the brunt. They are easy targets, voiceless, defenseless, and powerless against the accusations of adults. The adults meant to protect them instead condemn them to fire, rope, or exile.